Conversation with the Candidate continues right now.
Thank you for clicking on our extended digital conversation with the candidate, with Republican candidate for president Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami. We want to get to as many questions as we can here in our 30-minute commercial-free period. We're going to start things off with Hella Ross.
Thank you, Adam. Hi, Mayor. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, too.
As our first Cuban-American president, what would your strategy be towards China and Cuba, who are currently negotiating to establish a new joint military training facility on the island of Cuba? This tactical move could lead to a stationing of Chinese troops and other security operations just 100 miles off Florida's coast.
Yeah, and we've been to this movie before, right, in the 1960s with the Cuban Missile Crisis. We've underappreciated the threat of Cuba for a generation, and this current administration, in my opinion, has not provided a hemispheric strategy, right, which goes beyond Cuba. But when you think about the threat of China, it starts with fentanyl, right? They're trying to poison us. Then they're trying to encroach on our backyard with this military training base in addition to their spy base. Obviously, they're upping their aggression by actually flying spy balloons just in plain view for all of us to see. They're also doing something else with our money, by the way. The $330 billion that I was telling you that we're sending on an annual basis, plus the IP that they're stealing from us, which the FBI estimates at another $250 to $500 billion. They're doing something called the Belt and Roads Initiative. And if you don't know what that is, what they're doing is they're lending money to African, Eastern Bloc countries and also to South American countries to indebt them at cheap debt that they use. I call it the Python strategy. They use to strangulate these countries. And one of the provisions that they put in these deals, one of which they have, by the way, in the Bahamas. So if you think Cuba's close, 100 miles away, the Bahamas are 50 miles away. Okay, and one of the provisions are that they get to put a military training base or a military base anywhere where they can put a port, or they finance a port, and they finance a port in the Bahamas. So this aggression has to stop immediately. I think first we have to start with economic sanctions in terms of depowering them, like I said in the last segment, which is taking our wealth and start bringing it back into our hemisphere. It costs us nothing to do that. Right? In fact, arguably, it saves us money because our supply chain comes closer to home, it's more secure, and there's less risk, there's less geopolitical risk. So I think that's the first thing we have to do. I think we have to be strong with regards to Taiwan. Taiwan is producing a significant amount of our technology and microchips, which we rely on a daily basis. I mean, many of you remember what it was like to not be able to buy something in the middle of COVID because of how behind we were in the supply chain. I've been told by a leading microchip CEO that if China takes Taiwan and takes it over tomorrow, it would be a 14% reduction in our GDP. Okay, and that's just a number, right? That's Great Depression type reduction, but that's just a number. That's not even including the devices. We need to strengthen our relationships in the hemisphere, which we have not done. We've slid backwards. When you consider that in this hemisphere, China, Nicaragua, and Venezuela were the three socialist communist countries. Now you have leftist regimes in Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Peru. I mean, it's getting really scary. And we've got to use our own resources as a strength and combat China's aggression.
Thank you.
Follow up for you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Does normalizing relations with Cuba, is that something that would ever be on the table for you?
Of course it would be if they became democratic and if they freed their people. Of course we would normalize relations with Cuba. I think the problem is, I don't want to do it as a sort of a legacy building project for me, or I want it to be something that's real, that's sustainable, and Cuba should be an ally. Right? We should want Cuba, like Puerto Rico, that's in the air, we should want them, sort of in the umbrella of American democracy and being a democratic and free country. We should want every country in the world to be free and democratic. But I don't think we should just give away diplomatic relations for nothing in return.
We have a question coming from the online realm here. Chris Brown asks, with Miami already experiencing flooding, what is your plan to deal with global warming and rising sea levels?
So in Miami, we like to say that the environment is the economy. We don't differentiate the environment from the economy. I think that it's a false dichotomy to say that you have to pick one or the other. No, We get billions of dollars from ecotourism. We have drinking water that's existential for us. If we can't drink water, obviously we die pretty rapidly. And we have coral reefs. We have a variety of things, and hurricanes, as you mentioned. We as a city have decided to be part of an organization called C40, meaning we eventually want to get to carbon neutrality. We think it's something that we can achieve. It doesn't necessarily have to be at a sacrifice to our economics today, right, in terms of energy prices. And there's a tremendous amount of technological disruption. This goes back to sort of your question of how do we become a country that's disruptive technologically? I think we should be leading the world in climate technology, whether it's carbon capture, whether it's renewables, whether it's solar. Florida now is the leading solar provider in the country. So there's just a ton of technology. If you look at the Middle East, so we were talking about the Middle East earlier. If you look at the Middle East, they're one of the largest investors in renewable energies, and they're oil producing countries, right? They produce fossil fuels. So the world is heading in that direction on an economic basis. That's an economic case. We just have to try to get there as fast as we possibly can.
Next question comes from George Matthews.
Hey, George.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Pro-life should always include the mother. Say that again. Pro-life should always include the mother.
Yeah.
I've had several friends that have had troubled pregnancies.
Yeah.
And if abortion services were not available, they may not be with us any longer.
Yeah.
Given the so-called exceptions that some states have included are actually a little too ambiguous for doctors to risk their careers or their freedom, what will you do to protect the lives of these mothers?
Well, the exceptions cannot be ambiguous. And the doctors have to feel confident that they can, do what they have to do to protect the mother's life. And that's something that I've talked about in terms of what exceptions I would support, whether they be at a federal level, as president, because as president I would be dealing with federal legislation. So I would support a federal legislation that has clear exemptions so that doctors do feel protected to be able to save a mother's life in a troubled pregnancy type of scenario.
Mayor, in that federal legislation, where would you draw the line in terms of weeks gestation?
So, obviously it's a negotiation. I would be comfortable at 15 weeks. I'll tell you that as a mayor, we have the 4th largest public hospital in America. And I've seen babies born at 22, 21 weeks in an incubator that make it to full term. So to me, that's sort of the viability threshold. And so that's where I feel comfortable. I am pro-life personally. My wife, my 3 sisters, no brothers, mother-in-law, who would certainly give me a hard time. But that's my personal view. I think this is one of the issues that we cheapen by not having more profound discussions and make them into 30-second sound bites or 2-minute sound bites. So I actually appreciate the venue to be able to have a more comprehensive conversation because it's very nuanced. My sister's an OBGYN. I don't think I've ever said that publicly, but I have confidential conversations about some of the struggles that she has. It's hard as a doctor. It's very difficult. And when you hear some of the cases, and obviously this is anonymous, right? No HIPAA violations or anything. But when you hear some of the cases that you're talking about, the struggles that mothers have to go through, it's very heart-wrenching.
Next question from Chris Stawas.
Good evening. Thanks for being here. Did they get to school on
Is
time?
it evening? I guess
It'll air on Friday night.
Okay,
so,
okay.
Technically, yeah.
Someone was educated on this.
You're
I was not.
traveling for us, yeah.
Okay.
Although this is the digital portion, so
right.
it could be any time right now. Yeah.
This reminds me of when I was mayor. My predecessor, I'm obviously big into technology, and I said, we should have our servers in the cloud. And he's a older gentleman. He's like, what do you mean the cloud? Sorry.
Did they get to school on time is my question. No.
Listen, if I know my wife, they got to school 30 minutes early. Okay.
The U.S. and New Hampshire in particular continue to be ravaged by opioids, specifically synthetically made fentanyl.
Yes.
The DEA reports that the chemicals to make it are shipped from China to Mexico, where the fentanyl is produced and trafficked across the border into the U.S. What actions would your administration take to stop this and provide help to those who are suffering from addiction?
3 things. I think the first is we have to think long and hard about the fact that China has most favored nations trading status with us. Number 2, we have to look at declaring the cartels terrorist organizations. And number 3, and I think 3 could be even the most important because that's supply side. We got to look at the demand side. One of the initiatives that I did as mayor and as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors is focusing on 3 things that we underappreciate. And this is going to sound so simple. Sleep, eat, and exercise. Why is that important? Well, if you think about what fentanyl does, right? It's a synthetic opioid, and what it does is it produces dopamine in your brain, and that dopamine high that you feel is something that you want to feel over and over and over and over again. The only way to replicate that in a healthy way is through those three things, right? And I think one of the initiatives that I did, and I would want to do this as president, is I worked with a company called CrossFit and another company called Rogue, which is an equipment manufacturing a business out of Columbus, Ohio. And we set up these mini gyms in parks, city parks. And then we came up with a fee structure so that Parks and Recs employees can become CrossFit certified. We want to make sure that every kid in this country has the opportunity to be able to exercise for free, okay, for free. Why? Because maybe they probably can't afford $100 or $200 monthly gym membership. But what does it do? It gives them those chemicals naturally. And by the way, no candidate will give you this plan, okay? It gives you those chemicals naturally. Number two, it teaches a very valuable skill that we don't teach oftentimes in school, which is how to overcome adversity. Right? It's not like there's not an adversity class. At least I didn't take one. You learn the school of hard knocks through life, right? But I think it's important, and your parents obviously are a big factor in that. And the third thing is community. When you look at loneliness in terms of, suicides, in terms of, some of the mental health issues that provoke mass shootings, right? There oftentimes go back to a mental health issue whose systemic problem is loneliness, lack of community, lack of some of these things. So I would engage in a national campaign for that. Very, very different answer than you'll hear from most people.
Quick follow-up on that. And you mentioned designating the cartels as terrorist organizations. Yeah. Some other candidates in this race are saying, let's use the military, let's go into Mexico. Do you see any problems with using a policy like that over the long term?
So here's what I would say. My dad was mayor in 1985, right? So my dad was mayor of a city during let's call it the cocaine cowboy years. And the U.S. collaborated with Colombia at the time. And we sent in troops into Colombia to take out the cartel leaders. So the answer is sure. I would be happy to collaborate with Mexico, and I think that there'll be a new Mexican president before I'm elected president in 2024. So I'm speaking it into existence, and so it would be a great opportunity to talk to him and say, look, what kind of resources do you need? Right? We'll give you the financial tools like we did with the Russian oligarchs. We'll freeze all their money, all their assets. We'll use financial tools. We'll help you with energy, which is a big issue in Mexico. It's a big issue in the U.S., but it's also a big issue in Mexico. And we will make military resources available to you. Of course, I think what you're starting to see from some other candidates, and candidates that frankly don't have much experience in the public sector. The good thing about me is I have public sector experience and private sector experience. Usually you have candidates that you have all private sector experience or all public sector experience. In me, you have the combination of the two. And they'll come up with ideas that are not really realistic. I mean, we're not going to invade Mexico, at least not that I'm aware of. I just don't see that as a realistic option. I do think that we can collaborate with the Mexican government. We can bring to bear a significant amount of resources. And by the way, we're a huge trading partner for Mexico. Mexico is our #1 trading partner right now, more than China, by the way. So, their economy is contingent on ours. And so we have a tremendous amount of bargaining power with Mexico that I don't think we leverage fully.
All right. Next question comes from the online world, Charles Jesse, and this kind of fits in with what we're talking about. Crime and violence in Miami is trending towards improvement. What policies that you've enacted as mayor do you feel can be implemented across the U.S. to reduce crime and violence in our country, yet maintain respect for all citizens' civil rights?
Yeah. So I think this is one of the big reasons why I'm running for president. I think it was your question, one of the unique things that I bring to the table. I might have mentioned quickly, or might have mentioned in the other side, that last year we had a per capita low homicide rate since 1964. And this year we're 37% below that number. So to contextualize all those numbers, sometimes I get into a lot of what they call key performance indicators, KPIs, right? All these numbers. Chicago, which has led the country in homicides for 11 consecutive years, had 700 homicides. Now, Chicago's a bigger city than Miami, so let's compare apples to apples. But in our worst year, our top year, we had 330 approximately. This year, ending August, we have 17. 17. How did we get there? I think it was multifaceted. One is the culture that you create as a leader. So when I first got elected, I did two things that I thought were important. The first is every time there was a homicide in my city, every single time, let's say it happened this evening, or Friday evening, right, at 8 p.m., Saturday at 8 p.m., in the exact spot where it occurred, in the exact spot to the minute, 24 hours later, I ran a 5K that began and ended at that spot. Why is that important? It's important for two reasons. The first is I wanted my police department to understand the gravity of what just occurred. We sort of go about our daily business, and they do, and I'm not criticizing them at all. We all go about our daily jobs, our daily business. Sometimes we get desensitized to some of the things that are happening in our community. I wanted a little bit of shock, right? This just happened. If the mayor would have been standing in this very spot just 24 hours to the minute, I would have been shot. So, snap. Second thing is, if you go into my office, you'll see on the right-hand side, before you enter, a collage of drawings, of paintings from a lady named Chida Reagan. And they're young black kids that were shot and died, killed prematurely in our community. And why is that important? Well, any one of those kids could have been the mayor of Miami. Any one of those kids could have cured cancer. Any one of those kids could have operated on my kids and saved their life. So we need to understand that those children were robbed of generational opportunities, not just them, the kids that they would have had and the kids that they would have had, etc. So those are two things from a cultural perspective. The second thing is we never defunded our police. We always increased funding for our police. We always supported our law enforcement. Had the most officers ever in our history. We give them all the technological tools necessary for them to do their jobs. We have a 100% clearance rate. What does that mean? That means we've solved 100% of the few homicides we've had. It's actually over 100% because we solved some from last year. The national clearance rate is 54%. You get away with murder 50% of the time in this country. It's crazy. We never got into the no cash bail thing. I mean, you need to have law and order. We're a society of laws. Why do you think immigrants want to come to this country? They want to come to this country because this is a prosperous country, but it's also a law-abiding country where you know that if somebody does something to you, you can seek justice, whether it's monetary justice by suing someone or whether it's justice in terms of, someone doing something to you. So we never got into that. And then I think the third component is, having the lowest unemployment in America, highest wage growth. We're also qualitatively ranked as the happiest city in America and the healthiest city in America. So I kind of like jokingly say, if you're happy, you're healthy, you're working, and there's a lot of police officers, guess what you're not doing? Committing, violent crime. So I think it does require sort of an analysis of the ecosystem, and I do think it's scalable. To your point, I think those things, what I talked about, are things that can be done in every American city, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be.
Next question comes from Leonard Morrill.
Hey, Leonard.
Hi, good evening. How will you reduce inflation and reduce the deficit without the help of Congress, seeing that they only want to investigate each other?
Yeah, without the help of Congress. I would have to do some fancy lawyering to figure that out. And certainly I would certainly look into how I could do it without. I think one way you could probably do it is trying to work on the supply chain. In other words, getting our supply chain working again at the same level of rapidity that we had. That reduces prices because obviously when you have little demand, little supply and constant demand, you're going to have an increase in prices just by the scarcity of goods. So that's probably one way to do it without the help of Congress. But the truth is, we gotta face this monster. It's a monster, and I faced it as a councilman in 2009, and it was ugly. We had to cut our budget by 20%. It was not fun. I had employees that didn't shake my hand for 2 years. But you know what? Now they give me hugs. Right now they support me when I run for election without even an interview. Because what they see is a person that's fully committed 100% to their prosperity, right? Because what happens is when you have a prosperous city or country, it trickles down and everybody's prosperous. There's sort of a rising tide lifts all boats. And that prosperity has gone down to our employees. So our employees are getting paid better, and they feel more confident. But I don't know how much success you can have without Congress. But I'll tell you this, as a public official that was elected by 85% and reelected by 80%, I can tell you that I'm going to have 535 new best friends, 100 senators, 435 congressmen and women. I like to smoke cigars. Fun fact about me. So I hope that's okay with you guys. So I'll do whatever I have to do. You know what I mean? In terms of building relationships to try to, unlog jam some of this stuff. But I do think the mayoral personality, we were talking about it before, I do think the mayoral personality is a radical departure from what we've gotten as an option at the presidential level. And that could be the key to unlocking this.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Earl Rinker.
Hi,
Earl.
welcome to New Hampshire.
Thank you, sir.
How do you feel about what's going on in Ukraine?
Yeah.
And if at all, how it relates to our relations with China?
Oh, it's very connected. Let me just take a step back and say that I'm going to reiterate something I said earlier. I think the current administration's projection of weakness has emboldened our enemies. If you, again, are Xi or Putin, and I've read a lot about both of them, they have a vision for what their country should look like. I think Putin once said that this disassembling of the USSR was the largest geopolitical tragedy in the 20th century, or something to that effect. He actually said that in an interview with Oliver Stone on an HBO or something. And so it doesn't get any better than this for him. And so the question is he going to stop? Is he going to stop? Let's assume that we said, hey, take Ukraine. This is not our issue. This is a territorial dispute, as some candidates have said. Take it. Now, one of the reasons why he said that he used as a justification to go into Ukraine was that they were going to be offered NATO membership. Well, if he takes Ukraine, guess what? He now has put his border up against NATO's border. So that just doesn't make sense. There's something there that's off. And if you read about him, I mean, this is a tough guy. I mean, this is a guy that has killed political enemies. I don't know what some people are thinking in terms of who this is. And I will tell you this. Anyone who's a student of history who remembers how we got into World War II can tell you that there were a lot of people that were saying, that Hitler guy, don't worry about him. He's going to be fine. Let him take Poland, And all of a sudden it's France, and then it's, right? And then we're in a world war. And you know what? Those people that said don't do anything about it, they're nowhere to be found. You're going to look back, and they're going to be, So I think this is a game of chicken. I think anyone who knows the answer is lying to you, who tells you with definitiveness, oh, we just have to do this, this, and that. It's not that simple, okay? We have to understand what kind of resources we have to bear. We have to have accountability to the American people who are very frustrated that $100 billion has been spent in Ukraine when they see Maui burning to the ground, and they wonder whether resources are going to be sufficient to help a place like that. What I start to see as a prevailing issue is a loss of confidence. The American people have lost confidence in their leadership. They've lost confidence in the ability for America to make decisions, and they've lost confidence in a lot of our institutions. As president, one of the biggest things, my biggest job, is going to be to restore confidence in America.
Do we have to see, though, that Ukraine wins?
Of course. Do you want Russia to win?
No, but you did.
Yeah. Of course Ukraine has to win. Of course they do.
So it's important that we continue to support them, and that
we absolutely need to support them.
And the effect it'll have with China?
But, China and Russia are tied at the hip. In 2008, they declared their sort of unconditional support for each other. I know there's some candidates that talk about trying to decouple that support. I don't know that it's that simple. You're talking about two authoritarian regimes that look at the world very similarly. Their combined military spending budgets are about $320 billion, $80 billion on the China side. I'm sorry, $80 billion on the Russia side, $250 billion on the China side. We're about $900 billion. Just the U.S., when you consider all the NATO countries, it's about $1 trillion, $400 billion approximately. So these alliances are incredibly important that we maintain them.
Next question comes from Marie Mulroy.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for taking my question. I think you've touched on it throughout this conversation, but you're a late entry into the president. What did you see that was lacking in the other candidates that made you want to throw your hat in the ring?
So for me, it comes down to the 3 Ps. I think it comes down to personality. I think when you choose a president, you want to find that it's someone that has the ability to articulate whatever their position is, someone that's likable, frankly, and someone that represents the country well. I think it comes down to policy, which is P number 2. When you look at my policies of reducing the size of government, keeping taxes low, keeping people safe, leaning into innovation, it's sort of the 3-prong of how we built our ecosystem. That's a recipe for American prosperity. And then you got to look at profile, right? How does the Republican Party win? Right? And I think the Republican Party can win if you select a candidate that could influence 3 discrete categories of Americans: young voters, which we lost to Biden by 26 points, voters under 30, Hispanics, which we talked about, why that's important, and voters in cities. When you consider that a lot of cities are blue in America, when I got elected in 2017 by 85%, the year before in 2016, the former president lost Miami-Dade County to Hillary Clinton by 30 points, 3-0. I got reelected in 2001 by 80%. In 2021. In 2022, we won the midterms by 10 points, the Republicans. That's a 40-point swing. If you were to do that across urban America, I mean, this would be a Reagan-like electoral landslide, and it would be actually not just an electoral college landslide, but Republicans for the first time in I don't know how long would actually win the popular vote. And I think at some level that's important because that creates confidence, which we were talking about in terms of, sort of the projection of American leadership around the world. We're lacking in confidence. And I think winning a popular vote and a landslide electoral vote would give the American people a lot of confidence in the leadership that's selected, and it would give them sort of a bully pulpit to get things done.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, health care.
Yeah.
Are you going to repeal Obamacare, and what would you replace it with if so?
Health care is a massive part of our budget. I think the entire budget needs to be looked at top down. I believe that people should have health care, that's one of the basic, almost fundamental human rights that people deserve. So I would not commit to doing that on day one, but I would commit to looking at the entire budget and finding how do we get the cost savings that we need to balance our budget, because I think that is imperative. I don't think healthcare is one of the places that you look first, but there's a lot of fraud in healthcare, a tremendous amount of fraud, some of it in my community. And I think you need to look at technological resources, right? I think technology is a big component of how you save money. We have some great technologies, some companies that came out of Miami. There's a company called Papa, which is a great company. Papa is, when we talk about loneliness and we're talking about isolation, for the elderly, they charge the health plan, $5 per member per life for people that are in Medicare, and you get companionship. So you use the app, you can call someone over to help you do your groceries, to just talk to, etc. And what it's shown is the outcomes in terms of cost savings for people who don't call 911, who don't go to a public hospital because they have someone to talk to. It's massive. It's significantly more than the $5 per member per month that they charge the health plan. So that kind of disruption, I think, could save us a lot of money, but we have to take a comprehensive look at the budget. So
in terms of fixing the issue, it's just stuff on the margins. You're not fundamentally changing the healthcare law that Obama passed.
I wouldn't commit to it on day one. I'd have to take a look at it.
All right. Yeah. As we wrap up here, obviously you're a Florida guy, Miami Dolphins fan, I'm guessing.
You are guessing correct.
How do you plan to work your way into the hearts and minds of New Englanders who are big fans of Tom Brady and the New England Patriots?
Where's Tom Brady living right now? Does anybody know? Miami. So is Giselle, by the way. Yeah, he's living in Indian Creek. So, it's already happening. But
this
no.
This was an obstacle for your senator from Florida, Senator Rubio. He was having to dial himself back every once in a while.
Look, I think I won't attend New England games. Is that okay? Is that going to help? No, I don't know. No, but it's so much fun to have these sports rivalries. I think they give people a lot of joy and a lot of fun. So,
all right.
Thanks.
Last question for you. What's the biggest misconception about Francis Suarez out there right now?
That because I'm a mayor or because I'm young, I can't win the presidency or be an effective president. I think that would be the number one concern that voters have in all the discussions that I've had. And I think I'm older than a lot of presidents have been. And I actually think that the qualities that make you good at your job in this particular case are uniquely good for being the president, which was your question.
All right. Yeah. Mayor Francis Suarez of Miami, Thanks so much for your time here on Conversation with the Candidate. Thank you to those in the audience, and thanks to all of you watching out there. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.